The call came on a Tuesday. Joy was 28. In the middle of a board meeting she'd spent 6 weeks preparing for, when her phone vibrated with Christopher's name. She stepped out. She always stepped out for Christopher. "I need you to come home," he said. His voice had a texture she hadn't heard before. Not sad, not scared, something colder. The voice of someone who has found something they weren't supposed to find. "What happened?" she asked gently. "Dad's in the hospital." "Heart scare, he's okay. It's not entirely about him. I found something. When I went to get his insurance documents, I need you to see it." She was on a train within the hour. Bill Adkins was stable. The cardiologist used words like warning shot and significant lifestyle changes, and Joy spent exactly 40 minutes at his bedside being the reassuring firstborn before extracting herself and finding Christopher in the hospital cafeteria. He was 22. His pilot's license was 3 months old. He looked like their father across the forehead and their mother around the eyes, and he was sitting at a corner table with a manila folder in front of him and an expression on his face that Joy recognized because she'd worn it herself at 15. At the top of the stairs, watching lavender get painted over. The expression of someone rearranging their understanding of everything. "Tell me," she said, sitting across from him. He opened the folder. It had started simply. Christopher had gone to his father's study to find the insurance files, as Bill had asked him to before being transferred for observation. In pulling out the right drawer, a second drawer had caught and jammed, and in unjamming it he'd found a secondary compartment, the kind old desks have. Half hidden, the kind people forget about, inside a bundle of letters. Old envelopes, tied with something like a ribbon that had petrified with age. They were addressed to Bill. In Rosalind's handwriting, not the friendly, generous Rosalind, the best friend handwriting Joy recognized from birthday cards and thank you notes. Different, younger, more urgent. They were love letters, from Rosalind to Bill, predating his marriage to Martha. Letters that mapped the geography of a 3-year relationship Joy hadn't fully known existed. She'd known vaguely that her father had dated someone before her mother. Bill had mentioned it once, briefly, the way people mention old roads they no longer take. But she hadn't known the depth of it, hadn't known Rosalind. But the letters weren't the thing that made Christopher's hand shake when he held them across the table to her. The last letter was, it wasn't like the others. It was short. It was dated 6 weeks before Martha started showing symptoms. And it said, in handwriting slightly less controlled than the rest, "I've made my decision. I know what I'm doing, and I know why. I have waited long enough, and I am tired of waiting. You chose her over me, and I have spent years watching what that choice built. And I am telling you now that I intend to unbuild it. Not because I am cruel, because I loved you first, and I have never stopped, and some things were never meant to belong to other people." Joy read it twice. Then she put it down very carefully, like it was a thing that could break. Then she picked it back up and read it a third time. The siblings sat in the hospital cafeteria for 3 hours. They ordered coffee, neither of them drank. They went through the folder in its entirety. There were other things. A photograph of Rosalind and Bill from what looked like a college formal. Him with his arm around her. Both of them young in that specific, devastating way that old photographs make people look. A card Martha had written Rosalind and Bill. "My Rosie, my person, my soul sister, I don't know what I'd do without you," that Christopher must have had to put down quickly because Joy noticed the corner was slightly crumpled. She didn't address it. Let him have that. They talked through what they knew, what they remembered. The symptoms, the long, baffling decline. The doctors who said undiagnosed and mystery and shook their heads. And Rosalind, a nurse Rosalind who had access, Rosalind who had planned. Rosalind who had arrived at the funeral with flowers and stayed for 2 years of grief management until she was irreplaceable. "We don't know," Joy said finally, carefully. Because she was her mother's daughter, she believed in being honest about what you knew and what you didn't. But the letter, it's damning. It implies intent, but it doesn't tell us how, or if she actually— "I know," Christopher said. "I know we don't know." He looked out the cafeteria window at the parking lot. "But I'm going to find out." A beat. "We're going to find out," Joy said. They hired a private investigator named Joe Mensa, a quiet, methodical man who'd spent 20 years in insurance fraud before going independent. Joy found him through a lawyer friend, vetted him personally, and gave him the folder on a Friday afternoon in a coffee shop. Joe read everything, asked 3 questions, and said, "Give me 60 days. Those 60 days were among the strangest of Joy's life. She went back to work, Saturday in meetings, made decisions. Signed documents. Won a contract at her firm celebrated with champagne she didn't taste. All the while carrying this weight, this enormous, shifting, potentially catastrophic weight that she couldn't share with anyone except Christopher. She went home twice during those 60 days. Watched Rosalind move through her father's house with the practiced ease of someone who has been somewhere so long they've forgotten they weren't always there. Watched Bill recovering, slower now, quieter in the cardiac event way, lean into his wife for support. She watched Ariel, 22 and living back at home after a short-lived attempt at a business venture that had dissolved, complain about something at dinner while Rosalind nodded sympathetically, and Bill said, "Of course, sweetheart," and Christopher ate his food with the controlled, precise calm of a man counting down. Joy smiled when appropriate, asked about Bill's health, helped clear the table, the smile as shield. She had learned it from the right person, as it turned out. Just for the opposite reason. Joe Mensa called on day 58. Joy was at her desk when her phone lit up with his number. She picked it up, said nothing, waited. "I need you to sit down," he said. "I'm already sitting." "Sit better," he said, what Joe had found. Martha Adkins' medical records, obtained through a legal process. Joy's attorney had quietly initiated, showed a pattern. A very specific pattern of symptom escalation that corresponded with uncomfortable precision to her treatment schedule and who had administered it. Rosalind Carter hadn't been merely assigned to Martha's hospital. She had transferred twice to ensure continued proximity to Martha's case. The transfers had been papered over with legitimate professional language, but the trajectory was clear when you laid it out in a timeline. Joe had also found, through a contact in the nursing board's review records, that Rosalind had been the subject of an informal complaint at a previous placement, a complaint that had been resolved quietly and that referenced inconsistent medication administration with an elderly patient who had died unexpectedly. The complaint had been made by a family member. It had gone nowhere, but it was there. And then there was the pharmacist. A retired pharmacist named Kim Webb, 71 years old, living in a coastal town 4 hours away, who had worked at the hospital during Martha's illness, and who, when Joe showed up at her door with very careful questions, had gone very quiet and then said, "I've been waiting for someone to ask me that for 15 years. Kim had noticed discrepancies in certain medication logs, had flagged it internally, had been told the matter was reviewed and resolved, had left the profession 2 years later burnout. She'd filed it and never looked back. Until now she would talk. On record if it came to it. Joy sat at her desk for a long time after the call. Then she called Christopher. He answered on the first ring. She told him everything. The silence that followed was long enough that she checked twice that the call was still connected. Then Christopher said, in a voice that she would remember for the rest of her life, "She was there when Mom died. She was in the room. I was 5, I didn't understand, but I remember thinking it was strange that she was holding Mom's hand and not Dad. She was holding Mom's hand." Joy pressed her own hand flat against her desk to keep herself steady. "We're going to do this right," she said. "We're going to do this carefully and legally and completely. And when it's done, there will be no version of the world in which she walks away from it." "What about Dad?" Christopher asked. The question sat there between them like something alive. What about Dad? What about the man who hadn't seen it, who had loved a woman who killed his wife, who had grieved with the murderer and married the murderer and built a second life on top of the first one's grave? "We protect him," Joy said. "We tell him last, and we tell him together." There was one more piece. The piece Joy hadn't expected. Joe had found, through the inheritance records he'd reviewed as part of the background work, that Bill Adkins had a life insurance policy on Martha, a standard practice that had paid out upon her death. A significant amount into an account, from which, within 18 months of Martha's death, Rosalind had received transfers. Documented, time-stamped, not a gift, not declared as one, not framed as anything at all, actually, just money moving between accounts in a pattern that looked, to Joe's practiced eye, like a woman being paid for something. "She didn't do it just for love," Joy said, when Joe laid this out. "I don't think so," Joe said. "I think love was the story she told herself. But love doesn't usually leave a financial trail." Joy thought about the last letter. Some things were never meant to belong to other people. She thought about what kind of love decides it has the right to end someone's life to make room for itself. She decided that wasn't love at all. It was ownership. It was entitlement dressed in love's clothing, wearing it like a stolen coat. And it had taken her mother from her at 15. She drove home that weekend. She walked into her father's house and she hugged Bill carefully because of his heart, and she sat at the dinner table and she ate Rosalind's food, and she smiled at Ariel and she spoke to Christopher in glances across the table that said, "Not yet." Almost, not yet. And she watched Rosalind at the head of the table that had been Martha's table, in the house that had been Martha's house, and she felt something settle in her chest. Not hatred. She'd expected hatred and found instead something quieter. Clarity. It was almost time.